Alright, another video with a new audio setup. Because the last video, the audio wasn't the best. And this seems to pick up voice way, way better. It looks awkward, but hey, it works. It's just my old iPhone with the mic connected to it. Look at this. Look. So silly. But hey, whatever works, right? This is a fun one for me because I get to gush, or I'm going to gush, about my favorite cameras and my favorite camera system, more specifically Minolta, and my holy trinity of Minolta cameras. I'm going to say one thing and get it over with off the bat. I don't have an X700. I'm not including the X700 in this conversation. I've never used one. I'm sure it's great. A lot of people love it, but this is what I have. And I'm going to try to stay away from tech specs and focus more on camera feel as best I can, because I think that's really the important thing. All right, first up, XE7. Awesome camera. Really, really awesome. I got it as my second Minolta body to go alongside my XD11. And I really wanted something that scratched the itch of the SRT line. I owned one of those for about an afternoon. I actually bought it just for the lens that's on this camera right now. And it was cheaper to just buy the camera with the lens and then give the body to a friend. But having that camera for the very, very short period of time that I had it, I did enjoy how hefty the body was. And this body is serious. It's heavy. It can be used as a weapon. The thing about this camera that really shines is just how it feels in the hand. There's something reassuring about its weight and the way that it sits in your hand. Even though it's heavy, it's a very balanced camera. I like how this camera has a nice informative viewfinder. It's got aperture priority mode, and it has one of the best rewind mechanisms. I mean, rewinding a roll of film after you're done on this camera is very, very satisfying. It's so smooth and so easy. All in all, I'd have to say using this camera is like driving a really, really nice SUV or a really, really nice pickup truck. I mean, yeah, it's really, really heavy, but it really just does feel great to handle. Some people have said that it feels like using a Nikon F3. I shot a roll in a friend's Nikon F3 once a very long time ago, so I can't really remember how that feels, but I can kind of see how someone could think that this camera reminds them of something of that high quality. Next up, my favorite camera, XD11. This thing absolutely rocks. I mean, I have nothing but wonderful, wonderful things to say about it. If using the XE7 is like driving a really, really nice SUV, this is like owning a BMW. It's really, really awesome, especially when it works. I should say that I've had to repair this camera twice. The first time was when it arrived and the eBay seller had said it had worked, but it did not work. And a second time I had to get it repaired for a different reason. But thankfully, getting this camera repaired, not that expensive, and I will happily do it over and over and over again because, again, this camera is excellent. In the XD11 is where you can see the collaboration with Leica really shine. This camera was the basis for the Leica R4, 5, 6, and 7. I'll be perfectly honest with you, I've never used a Leica, I've never held one in hand, but I've held a lot of other film cameras, and this one is probably the smoothest and nicest to operate. The dial layout and the layout of the viewfinder make it just sublime. And when you have the camera up to your eye, all of the information is where you need it to be. You rarely ever have to take the camera away from your face. And more time in front of your face with the proper settings means more proper exposures and less time double checking to see if they're correct. To circumvent some hurdles, the very clever people at Minolta designed this camera in such a way. In order to get proper exposures, the electronics and mechanics in this camera work in succession instead of doing things all at once. And you can really feel that when you're taking a shot, when you're, advancing the film lever, pressing the shutter button. It makes for this silky smooth operation that no other camera has. No other camera that I've experienced has. And on top of all that, it comes in a really small, lightweight package, especially with this 45mm f2 lens, which is fantastically sharp. If you shoot Minolta and you don't have this lens, you need to go get one. They're super cheap. Seriously, go buy one. They're amazing. It quickly became my favorite SLR camera, and if anyone said, hey, I really like Minolta and I really want a fully featured camera, which camera should I get? This is the camera that I would recommend, no questions asked. Last but not least, the very cool, the very quirky, very unique Minolta XK. Let me be very clear. I would not own this camera if I didn't get extremely, extremely lucky with a Craigslist find. They are absurdly expensive. So if you like Minolta cameras, you probably know about this infamous, very infamous camera. It's a pro-level SLR meant to compete with the likes of the Nikon F2, and it is full of pro features. And it's an extremely clever camera, and I think if you've had experiences with other SLRs in the way that most SLR film cameras are laid out, you would be very surprised when you got this in your hands. The real big drawback to this camera is how heavy and how imbalanced it is. I mean, I know I have a very heavy lens on here now, the 58mm f1.2, but even with something like the 45mm f2, which is considerably lighter and a lot smaller, there's still something off about how the camera can sit in your hand and how the weight shifts in your hand. That aside though, this camera is chock full of some of the most clever features I've ever seen on a camera. I mean, the exposure compensation is a little knob that the farther you press it to one side, the more or less compensation you get. And it snaps back to the center, kind of like the joystick on an Xbox or a PlayStation controller, meaning the next exposure you take won't accidentally be under or overexposed. It has this really clever extended shutter speed range dial, so if you set the camera to bulb mode, below the exposure compensation dial is more shutter speeds. It goes all the way down to 16 seconds. I think the exposure compensation knob is the most useful feature, but this little bar here on the front of the camera is probably the most clever feature. It's a power override button. So if your camera is turned off to conserve battery, and you see something you want to take a picture of, all you have to do is put the camera up to your face, press the button, and the camera's power will turn on, and it'll override the camera being off so that you can take a picture. I don't think I've ever seen another camera that has something like that. I'm sure that there is a camera out there that does, but it's such a well thought out feature that is so useful. I'm surprised it's not in many other cameras. And you may be thinking, oh, well, you know, adding extra electronics might hurt the camera's longevity, but mine's in really, really rough shape, and it works flawlessly. I mean, there are barely any light seals left. I'm pretty sure someone poked the shutter curtain and it's all crinkly. No issues. It shoots flawlessly. These things were clearly built to withstand a lot of abuse. I can understand someone finding the weight and the feel of the camera to be a bit of a deal breaker, but honestly, this camera is just genuinely so much fun to shoot. All of those quirky and clever features really just add up to a joyous experience. It should be no surprise to you that I'm a big fan of Minolta cameras. I think the lenses are fantastic, and everything is super affordable. It's a shame that they're not around today in the state that they were in when they made these three honestly excellent cameras. If you were looking to get into Minolta cameras, something like an SRT or an X700 would be great, but honestly, I can't recommend the XE7 and the XD11 enough. I can't really recommend the XK to anybody unless you can get it for at a ridiculously low price like I did. There are so many more better, really high quality pro grade cameras from that era that you could get for a lot cheaper with a huge amount of lenses and are much more readily available than the XK is. It's really, really fun, but I wouldn't tell anyone to go out and buy one. If you were someone who really wanted a fully featured SLR like I was, the XD11 is a no-brainer. And if you're someone that's a beginner looking for your first film camera or an SLR to complement maybe a point and shoot that you bought to start out with, The XE7 or the XE5, I think, are really, really great first buys. They can be found relatively cheaply and are really fun, solid cameras to shoot.